So RIP to Noam Howard. This is actually tearing me up pretty bad. A new birth is revolutionary, but you've got to horse swaddle them with love. A brand new life is gentle and fragile. We are very vulnerable and fragile and tender. So you got to be gentle and you got to be tender. And I didn't realize I found these two little mice. It could have been two little rats for all I know. But it just, one little mouse came here, was just crying. And frankly, I don't have a way to catch a chipmunk or any of the wild out here. And I had thought, it was crazy, the only way that I could, sort of take care of any of these wild creatures is if one of them just kind of, walked up to me and said, "Hey, I'll be your friend if you'll be my friend." And that's exactly what Noam Howard did. And Noam Howard was fantastic and wonderful. I came from a place of abuse, and it's been very tough just because nobody gave a shit then, and it's kind of, it seems like a thing that kind of, a trend. Noam Howard, I am sorry, but I got lessons from Noam Howard, and I'm going to remember who they were and what they were about. They were two mice coming from a place of abuse. I was always the one to set the mouse trap, and you don't want a bunch of, rodents all over the place. Though, however, when I wanted somebody, when I wanted, someone specific in my life to be there for me, to be my friend, to sit next to me, to be by my side, to have my back, they weren't there. And yet there was a mouse that was out there that was running around everywhere, and then eventually I had found that it had died. Now I'm very super sad about Noam Howard, and let me tell you some things about Noam Howard. So the first one I saw was Noam, and maybe it's 5 days ago. Noam came out here, just right here on the floor, right here in Conejos County, and was crying. Tiniest little thing in the world. If you were afraid of Noam Howard, you got fucking issues. So the place from abuse, I just remember my abuser just being so creeped out and disgusted by, mice. Like, oh my God, they're so gross. And I wonder, they're abusers, so they don't understand love and kindness and decency, and they don't know how to. And so, part of me, I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep my abuser away, so I'm thinking, well, hell, maybe if I have a couple of mice as pets in a cage, maybe that'll keep them away. When I wanted somebody to sit next to me, I didn't have, people that should have had my back fucking 40 years ago to sit next to. They couldn't do it, but this mouse could, Puck Shinwa. And then, I had some traps and some little pieces of poison in the rocks, and I guess it got into the poison. And I was real sad about it because it was like, shit, when I was down there sleeping on the floor, and I kind of hated that it was crawling here and there and everywhere. But when I was sitting on the, floor getting my work done, it was like my little buddy. It was just kind of hanging out. And it's a little tiny mouse. Mice can only eat a little fucking, a half a cracker, a quarter of a cracker, 3 drops of water. That's their whole, day's meal. So I fucked up with Noam Howard. I fucked up big time, but, I forgive myself, and I hope, whatever spirit, God, there is, because I'm in a tough spot right now. They were canaries in a coal mine, and I wanted to, get the temperature's dropping, and I need to get some kerosene, and I want to drive out this way. I got 2 ways I could drive out, or maybe 3 or 4 ways, but 2 easy ways. And when I drove out this way, I drove up to the top of the hill. When I drove up, there was a RAV4. There was a green Toyota Tundra and a RAV4 that had drove up. I wasn't feeling well. And these, I've had a stalker for a while. I went ahead and took a nap instead of going out and getting the kerosene. they're going to die of lack of thirst and of cold. And so they probably were thirsty and cold the first night that I took Noam, and I had like a pile of leaves that this other mouse had set up. I want to say Puck Shinwa. And I put him in a bucket. And I put all the food and water in the bucket that it could have. And, you know, it was so spunky and energetic when I first had got it. And then I found Howard the next day. And I was actually sad because there's 3 little mice, and I think one of the dogs had maybe played with it, or maybe it just froze that night and froze to death, and I saw that it had died, you know, close to where one of the dogs were. And so I was like, well, shit, you know. Another big lesson from Noam Howard: give the mother all the room in the world to nurse the baby. They're given warmth with their body heat. They know how to be kind and tender. Again, they were tender and gentle. And because of the way I was raised, with this abuser being all freaked out and creeped out about a damn mouse, a little tiny mouse, and it could have been a rat for all I know. You know, grew up on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They had Master Splinter, and he was trained by Hamata Yoshi. And then you also had the Secret of Nim, where you had, you know, the Timothy mouse, but you also had the rats of Nim, who were super, you know, scientific. You do all these experiments with mice. They're like the Laka the dog. The Russians took a dog and sent him out into space, and, you know, that was sad. But we do that to mice all the time. And let's say I save 1 or 2 mice, then I don't feel bad about, you know, I'm just feeling like Charlie Kelly here, just Charlie Kelly, king of the rats. It's just like, fuck. And, you know, crazy ass, I probably shouldn't even say it, but I guess if you're thirsty as heck, a 5-gallon bucket that's not filled up, chipmunks and mice and rats just can't wait to jump into that bucket, and then they can't jump out. They can't knock the bucket over. They can't swim up. They can't maintain. They drown themselves. It's, I didn't mean to, but just having like a 5-gallon bucket that's filled halfway full, they'll figure out a way if they're thirsty to try to get the water, and I've even seen like maybe 2, like there'd be 2 mice. And so the one mouse jumped in, saw the other mouse was just lying there, jumped in without taking notice. Oh, my buddy who was moving about isn't moving about no more. So Noam was just so tiny and so little and so trusting and so cute. And I feel like I probably picked him up too many times. And I shouldn't have done that at the very end when basically they only lived for 2 days. And the first day it was cold. But I didn't think it was that cold. But they were brand newborn. And so it takes 20 days. Google searched it. And it takes 20 days of milking, of nursing, for mice to finally be able to forage for themselves. So I had all the water and stuff for them, but I didn't notice that they weren't eating, you know, and drinking by themselves. I assumed that they were just eating and drinking when they could. Like they were like little lizards. And I remember when, you know, I had saved, you know, or I'd put him here and then I took him down there, and then he was just so spunky and was just climbing all over the leaves and the branches. And it looked like he was chewing on one of the branches. I guess I thought he was trying to get water or moisture, and he was actually trying to get water. He was trying to get some mother's milk. I don't know what happened to the mother. I'm so tore up about Noam Howard, and they were just mice, and, you know, it's kind of crazy because I have, you know, been setting mouse traps without even really thinking much about it. There's a rat that I just saw, you know, drowned itself in one of the buckets of waters that, you know, I have dogs, so I have buckets of water. And I felt sad about it because I was kind of looking at the size, because I was like, dang, if those little, you know, if Noam Howard grew up to be full size, I would need a nice, you know, big cage so it can kind of move about and be protected from, you know, the wild and from everybody else. Noam was just so cute and adorable, and at the very end, so the first day he was spunky, and I gave him all this food and water, and I guess maybe because I was able to get some water into his mouth that he was but I guess maybe he wasn't spunky. Maybe he was just hungry as shit, and he kept crying and he wanted more food, and I didn't understand. I got all the food here, and I feel like I should have played with them a little bit more. Give them time and attention. The time and attention is important. Native American, there's a proverb that says something about you talk to the animals and plants, and it's not even about whether or not it's good for the plants or the animals. It is good for them because it gets you to care about them to where you don't destroy them. At the very end, Noam was just clinging on to my finger. I was about to bury Noam and Howard here soon. They've been dead a couple days. I'm just so sad. And, because I feel like such a piece of shit, I don't want to just throw them in the ground because I feel like, well, I fucked up, huh? Well, I didn't do a good job and just, throw them in the ground without thinking about it. I'll probably take a picture of them. I want to kind of come up with a tombstone. I got like 20 rocks that I come out with. But he was just clinging onto my little finger like this. When I first got him, he did this thing where it looked like he was, like trying to scare me. And he might have tried to scare me, like trying to get back, I'm going to scare you, get back. Or maybe he was afraid and he was, I'm scared. Or maybe he was losing his balance. I don't know, but I was a little bit creeped out. Again, coming from a place of abuse. I think that I'm happy that I got to know Noam Howard because I feel so much more like in tune with my own kind and gentle nature. At the very end, the first day they had moved, they were moving around much more, and I had slept and it was cold. I got body heat and I got covers. And then, my dogs, they got a coat so they can withstand, just as much as I can withstand. But I think that they were, less than 20 days old, maybe just a day or two old or something. They're enough to move around, but just barely. And, I wasn't like, I would pet them a little bit on their heads. And, Howard at the very end was just taking a breath every second and a half, every 2 seconds. So I want to speak about better days. But when Noam had shook his hands, I was creeped out and scared. And I was like, oh, okay, you're a tough guy. All right, I'll back up. I'll respect you. I had the food and water there, but when I read and looked up, somebody had said how they took care of it. Basically, you got to get a dropper and you got to force feed them, put it right into their throats. And you got to feed them every 2 hours. Every 2 hours, you got to feed them. So I want to put this in my baby book. I want to come up with a baby book because Maslow's hierarchy, Piaget, and Vygotsky, they all apply for a mouse. Mice have cognitive development. They got the Maslow's hierarchy. They'll need warmth, shelter, and food and water. All that. They need Piaget, the cognitive development. Vygotsky, probably scaffolding, social learning with scaffolding, but also with the zona proximal development. How can they learn if, they don't have someone teaching them? So Maslow, Piaget, Vygotsky, all these things apply. You can look at how to take care of a mouse and take care of a human better. When I think about my abusers, it's like, how in the hell did I even survive with them? Because, God, I remember actually, I'm like maybe 4 years old, and there was like I guess the mother mouse was gone, and there was 3 little baby mice there, and I'm in the stripping room being a slave and having to, do all this slave labor in the stripping room. And I'm only, 4 or 5 or so. And one of my siblings was there too, and we were just kind of petting the little mice. And my abuser freaks out, calls the cat, and then the cat just eats these little baby mice right there in front of us. Noam and Howard never even opened their eyes. Just tiny little, trusting, kind little mice. How could you freak out with a tiny little baby mouse? Oh my God, it's a baby mouse. What are you, of mice and men? What are you, a man or a mouse? You a woman or a mouse? Like, what the heck? But I didn't realize that they were so damn vulnerable, that they were so weak and tender and tiny. that their little tiny, baby body was just so weak and tender, and I was gentle with it, and so I want to, I'm only guessing that it was cold and lack of mother's milk, because basically, I guess until the next night, so then the next day, so that person was driving, that was out there, and then I take a nap, and then I work on a couple things here, and then I go back. And when I go back, they're basically gone. So basically just 24 hours of not having their mother's milk, 24 hours of not being fed every 2 hours, and not having the warmth, body warmth of their mother. Yeah, they were gone. And I do, if that motherfucker wasn't driving out there, I was being safe, not sorry, in terms of protecting my property and protecting my stuff here. But I wasn't babying these baby mice. And I haven't really been babying hardly anything. And I'm like, God, that's how you have to be. You have to baby yourself. You have to baby plants. You got to baby animals. When I eventually find, Miss Perfect, then, my better half, Miss Wonderful, then... So I needed to have a dropper. I needed to feed them right into their mouths. And I had a premonition too. I was thinking of some other earlier. There's this Anne and Frank. I had these 2 kittens, and the dogs had got into them. My mother says, get those kittens outside the house. And they had the kittens under the house. And I guess the kittens came back outside the house. The dogs started playing with them, and then they were dead. And then instead of picking, I walk outside, and the kitten is just lying on the concrete on the sidewalk right outside the house. They knew about it. They saw it. They was sitting over there by the damn swing or whatever, just staring. And I couldn't stop. Even if it was dying and was going to die, I should have been right there next to it. I held it for as long as I could. I spent the night, 3 nights, trying to nurse it back to health, but it was so weak and it was barely moving. And then I had left. And I had left for a couple hours, and I just kept thinking about it. I kept thinking about how of a terrible father I was, and I need to get back, and I need to get back. And then when I came back, it had died. And it was probably inevitable that it was going to die, but that's kind of what I was feeling when I was, when I was up here a little bit, when I was working on my things. I wasn't here for too long, but that motherfucker, if he wasn't there, then I drive out, I get my kerosene stuff, and I come back, and I have... my kerosene needs met. They're warm for tonight. Do they live, without the milk? I think that it's a strong possibility that they still live. Now they got their warmth. Now they got their, now I'm paying attention. I'm paying attention now. Basically, when you have a baby, get fucking serious. Take a picture. Name it. Give it a name immediately. Start talking to it immediately. And Google it. Google the, how much food, how much protein, how many calories, what's best practices. What are the best practices for raising a deer or an elk or a wolf or a mouse? What's the best practices? Or a human. All this is, even if I don't make much of myself, to be a good father, I think, would be quite satisfying for me, because I don't think you have to be a fucking violent piece of shit. I don't think you have to be a violent, terroristic piece of shit. I think it'd be easy to talk to your kids instead of being a violent, authoritarian asshole. Maybe at the end of the day, if they hurt somebody, you might have to take a stand or something, but I think your kids want you to love them, so just talk to them and say, here's why I want this to happen and that happen, here's why. I didn't notice that they were dying, but it seemed like they were slowly, getting weaker and weaker. They were already kind of weak in the very beginning when Noam, and I say Noam and Howard from Noam Chomsky and Howard Zinn, when Noam was kind of clinging onto my finger, I was kind of worried about it. It's claws, right? And it's got buck teeth, right? That's what mice have. It didn't even have any teeth. It didn't even have any claws. It was able to kind of cling on to my finger, and I remember it clinged on, and I kind of shook it off, and I was like, ooh. Did I break off one of its nails? It was just so dinky and tiny. Could you imagine being afraid of a tiny life? I think my abusers are against love, and they just don't, they didn't abuse me to make me stronger. They abused me because they were insecure on the inside, and they didn't have the space and the knowledge and the planning. They didn't plan. Oh, oops. What did we do? What is this? What do we got here? So it's totally crazy. It's like I can't really catch a chipmunk. You know, there's been a couple of chipmunks that have drowned, and I feel super bad about it. But unless a chipmunk just comes right up to me and lets me catch it, and then I'll feed it the water and the clothing. And so unless, if another baby comes up, I will take care of it so much fucking better. My dogs are alive, so I have a greater success rate than failure rate. Younger bodies tend to heal faster, maybe better. But even in spite of that, I think you got to stop, take it serious, name that baby, talk to that baby. Jennifer Lawrence says something about having room in her heart for her husband. I got room in my heart for the whole fucking world. It's about time and effort. How much time and effort do I have to give the food and water and attention to the people that need it? That's ultimately. And I think when you have a baby and you say, okay, I'm going to take care of this baby, you have to resign almost completely. You are who you are, and you need to make sure you get all that you need to get, so you can take care of your baby. But Noam and Howard were tiny, and Noam was small. Howard was even smaller. So Howard was outside, crying outside. And so I don't even know where the damn nest is, because the Noam was right here inside. And then the second one that had died, I haven't even named that one. I guess we could say Sequoia. So Sequoia had died right here. And I buried it, next to Katari. Katari was one of the puppies that was stillborn from last year. And that's from Costilla County. Anyways, I'm getting off track. I stayed with Noam and Howard until they died, just like Tecumseh. There's a song, I forget who the artist is, but he says he just wants you to hold his dying arms. Dying. Just hold him. You were here, and you had somebody with you. Don't die alone. When I think about Anne and Frank, I don't know what happened to Frank, but I think Anne died alone, and she had this terrified look on her face. Sacagawea was this kitten in Breckenridge County, and I was talking to, my abusers, and I'm like, I feel like I'm microwaving myself, and she just kept talking at me, and then my kitten overheated and got microwaved, and I'm like, fuck. Straight A student, valedictorian, but because I trust my abuser so fucking much, I ignore myself being overheating. I ignore the danger that I'm in because, well, she's not acknowledging that I'm being microwaved, but she's not in my shoes. She doesn't walk in my house, so she wouldn't know what it feels like. And it's not the only time she's done that. There's another time I'm in the middle of the interstate. And I'm like, okay, I feel like there's people here, people there. I might get pulled over, ran over. Who knows? I'm scared. And she's just like, yeah. Are you trying to get me to fucking wreck? What the fuck? And just hang up, you piece of shit. Fucking prick. Ignore the situation that I'm in and then at the end of the day, let's assume that, I have a big PowerPoint and a big poster board and DNA and everything. All the evidence in the world. And she's convinced, okay, you're being harassed. Okay, you're being harassed. She wouldn't give a shit. It doesn't matter what the hell anybody would ever do. She's never wanted to be. That sucks. But that's why I like Noam and Howard, because I'm coming to these realizations and I'm saying them out loud. And Noam and Howard are better parents than my parents were. Noam and Howard, I wasn't afraid or scared of them. And my mother wants to be terrified of them as if like they're tiny and adorable beyond all comprehension. Them doing their little scares, now that they're dead and gone, I fucking loved every bit of everything that they did. And I feel so fucking, when they were dying, basically it was cold, it's freezing. It's like hot here in Conejos County, but then cold. It's September, so it's like it gets to 70 to 80, but then it's getting to closer and closer to freezing. Anyways, it's, 2, 3 o'clock at night. I took, I slept for 4 hours and I wake up about 1 or 2 and they're still barely breathing and still, going. And I just thought that, anyways, Noam is going to die. He kind of crawls around real fast. It's like he saw death. He saw death coming and he wanted to crawl away from it. And he crawled all the way around and then he died. And when I had noticed that when I went back, right, 2 days, the first day they seemed to be more energetic. The second day, not so much. And just a terrible downturn in their health. And Howard was just, breathing super duper slow. And Noam wasn't as fun. And I thought he was just being fun and playful. But he was probably just like, I am thirsty and dying and I need some milk. When he was chewing on that little stem, he was probably thinking, maybe I could get some milk. I thought he was chewing on it, but he don't have any teeth to chew on it. But I thought he was getting maybe there was water all over the place. But they didn't know enough to do it. I didn't know enough to. So I'm sorry to Noam and Howard. I hope you guys rest in peace. You gotta be patient. They're weak and tender. You gotta get serious, overly serious. They're very tiny eaters. I am in a tough spot right now with mailbox and insurance, my transmission, driver's license, a felony charge, up against the cold. No bank account, no credit card to order anything online. My house is crooked. I don't have a house. I got a shed. Mailbox is an hour away. They're so much smaller than a dog. My dogs can be assholes. And again, when you just want somebody to just sit next with you, when I was freaked out and I couldn't hold them in my hand, but as they were getting, dying and I stayed with them, I held their arms, and just like I did with Tecumseh, and Noam kind of ran around, and I was like, "Nuh-uh, you're not, that wasn't it, was it?" And I kept petting him, and he didn't, rigor mortis set in with Sacagawea, that kitten in Breckenridge, quickly. She had died. And immediately just froze up like this. But the mouse didn't do that. Noam or Howard. They both were still like real tender, and they just kind of curled up like this. And then that was it. So I judged them because of their parents. But I feel like give them space, give them room. They're not foraging on the fucking ground. The wild isn't romantic. I wasn't 100% attuned to what their needs were, so I need to find out their needs 100%. And then I stayed with Howard until Howard finally died. And Howard, I had them both kind of... more with Howard than with both of them, but with Howard I had him in a little piece of insulation, and I had to keep him warm, and I got body heat, but I don't want to roll on him. And so how do you keep a tiny little thing warm when you don't have a heater or propane? I'm off grid, so I had just in a little piece of insulation, and nice, comfortable, plenty of cushion, and I was blowing hot air on it and hot air onto the sides, and every time it would get hot air in its face, it would awaken. And I think it was just kind of just one more little breath of life. And I noticed it with the plants, and I noticed it with the animals, and it's like they cling on to life. They want to live. The sunflowers, one of the stalkers ran over a sunflower, and I'm fucking broken up about that shit too. Motherfucking sunflower grew up out of a rock. But what the fuck do people who don't give a shit about life? What the fuck do they care? Pueblo, they were against sun fucking flowers. Oh, God damn it. Sorry, Noam and Howard, man. Damn it. when the dog did that, I'm like, he's like Lenny, but it's like I'm like fucking Lenny. R.I.P. Noam Howard.